Let's bring in Tennant. He's the head of climate, energy and environmental policy with the Australian Industry Group. Tennant, thanks so much for your time. Let's start with this report out today. It's 3 years in the making, the Australian Industry Energy Transitions Initiative. Can you give our viewers a sense of what that report has found?
So this is a report that a large number of massive Australian companies have collaborated with researchers from CSIRO and elsewhere on to look at what are their technical and economic pathways to their part in a net zero emissions world economy and in Australia. And that work has found the path is not easy, but it is achievable to reduce emissions from these sectors, iron and steel, aluminium, LNG, basic chemicals, by 93% by 2050. Now that's going to take a huge amount of supporting and enabling infrastructure. Hydrogen has an important part to play in that, but of course we don't get hydrogen in these kind of quantities without a heck of a lot of electricity generation. Electricity output would dramatically increase over the next couple of decades, and even more so if Australia is able to take up this energy superpower, clean energy superpower opportunity that many see but which is far from guaranteed. We would be talking,
and as you said,
multiples
we're talking
of
about
current output.
Well, yeah, and we're talking multiples of current output, but also $440 billion cumulative investment by 2050. So I think you gave us a sense of it. We're talking a massive scope here of the need to invest in that space.
That's right. And those sorts of investments, which would be in both electricity generation and transmission, but also in major new capital equipment, in our steel makers, huge investments in hydrogen electrolysis. Those sorts of investments need a bit of confidence that policymakers are going to be supportive and that they're not going to just change the rules at the next election. So the policy piece of this is very important. The safeguard mechanism is extremely relevant to potentially supporting. Depending on how it's done, it could undermine, but the intention is to support those sorts of investments.
And how does it relate, that cost, because obviously it's not in a vacuum, it happens in an economy, an industry where other investments would otherwise be needed for business as usual. How does it relate to a business as usual approach where, say, assets would need to be recycled, renewed anyway?
Yeah. So there's two aspects to this. One is that the upfront investment involved in a clean pathway for Australian industry is higher than the capex, the capital investment needed in a business as usual pathway. The other side of that, though, is that operating costs will be substantially lower in that pathway, particularly because there'll be a whole lot of expenditure on fuels that won't be needed, with heavy reliance on zero marginal cost renewable energy for a large share of those inputs. So if you put those things together, higher upfront expenditure, lower operating expenditure, and you take account of the avoided impacts of climate change, as long as we continue to be part of a world that is moving in this direction, then the overall costs are lower with this pathway than business as usual. But the investments are very large. The need for confidence in those investments is very important.
And as you mentioned, some of the biggest emitters in the country involved in this process, whether it be Woodside, BHP and others, what's the view among those participants in this report, in this analysis about the safeguard mechanism? Do they welcome it? Do they want that as part of that certainty picture you spoke about?
So I've come to this studio directly from the launch of that report, where many of AI Group's members, like BlueScope Steel, Orica and others, were present, and they are excited about this pathway. They're excited about the report that they have been deeply involved in the production of, but they don't underestimate the size of the challenge. There is a lot that needs to come together to make this work. The technical pathway is very important. The policy piece of it is important. We've got a lot of work to do to make that transition in our electricity system work as well as it can. But we do have opportunity, and those businesses are excited about their opportunities.
The criticism from the Greens and others have been around the integrity of what's known as the carbon offsets, the way that companies can mitigate against their own pollution with other offsets. Is there a way to shore up that part of the puzzle here?
Yeah, so in the safeguard mechanism that the government is redesigning, businesses are going to be asked to reduce their entitled baseline of allowed emissions every year. Now, that rate of reduction is in many cases going to be faster than the opportunities those businesses have within their own boundaries. So it's very important that there be some flexibility so that you have an even cost of abatement across the whole sector. You don't have huge pain points for one or another facility that may have a great opportunity, but not one that could be done for another 5 years. So offsets are one way of providing that flexibility, and in the government's design, they will be the most important method of flexibility for the first several years. There's other parts of it, including the crediting with safeguard mechanism credits of facilities that do better than their baseline. But we wouldn't expect to see a lot of those units in the first couple of years while businesses are actually making the big investments that will need to pay off before they find themselves well below baseline. Offsets are important. Now, there's been some questions raised about two things with offsets. One is, are they real? Do they have integrity? Is there being credits being issued for emissions reductions that simply haven't taken place? And that set of questions has been pretty well answered by the major review by the former Chief Scientist Ian Chubb, which reported last month, and which found, yes, there are elements of the current domestic offset arrangements that need to be improved, and they've made recommendations there, but the fundamental structure is sound, and it looks as if the government has accepted those recommendations. There will be confidence in the offsets that are available. The other concern
Tennant Reid
is...
sure. Yeah, just wrap up if you can, just quickly on that one.
Are businesses going to simply buy offsets, even good ones, rather than make change within their business? And what we're seeing today is that there is tremendous interest from Australian industries in charting and walking their own path to net zero. So it's not just going to be a matter of fobbing the task off on other bits of the economy.
Tennant Reid, Head of Climate and Energy at the AI Group, thanks so much. Appreciate your analysis.
It's a pleasure.